name is Charlene Margot, and I'm the proud co-founder of nonprofit The Parent Venture. We are so proud and pleased to have with us tonight Vanessa Kellam from Health Connected to talk to you about relationship resilience, preparing young people for healthy relationships. Welcome, Vanessa.
Thank you so much, Charlene, and thank you everybody for being here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that you can see what you're in for this evening, and hopefully we'll be able to spend some time together really talking about how we can build up our young people. So I hesitate to use the word vaccinated, but that's how I see it, is giving them the skills so that they can have healthy relationships, or healthier relationships than they would otherwise without our involvement. So this evening we're going to be taking a little poll in just a moment. So Charlene, you might like to maybe give me access to those and I can drive those. But we are then going to talk about the desire of romance and why adolescents are just so sort of fired up for romance right now. And then we'll be talking about 5 protective factors that we as trusted adults can really help our young people with, so that we can sort of vaccinate them against things that might not be so healthy. We're going to talk about, well, gosh, you know, sometimes it does go wrong and what can be done, as well as Q&A. And just a reminder, anytime you see purple text, it means those things are actionable. So they're the things that I'm really thinking we can either do or say so that we can be really helpful to our young people. So this evening, we are going to be talking about mainly intimate partner violence. And for our purposes, intimate partner violence is going to be sort of more described as that physical violence. So experiencing rape, physical violence, and or stalking by an intimate partner. But we know that that's not the only type of intimate partner violence. It can be psychological, and there are other types, emotional as well. It can be even financial. So, but for us this evening, and for the purpose of this poll, which has just launched, then that's our definition. So I'm going to read through our poll questions, because some of you might be driving along. And you might have your partner in the car or something like that, and it can foster some discussion for you as you drive. So I've just got some statistics in this poll about intimate partner violence. I'm going to call it IPV just because it's a bit of a mouthful. But the first one, the statements are true and false statements, and I'm really wanting you to see what you think. More than 1 in 3 and more than 1 in 4 men have experienced IPV, intimate partner violence. What do you think? Do you think it's true, or do you think that's false? The second one, the incidence of IPV for gay men is higher than for lesbian women. What do you reckon about that statistic? Might have to scroll down too, because there's 5 questions or 5 statements. 1 in 4 multiracial non-Hispanic women have experienced IPV in their lifetime. What do you think? True or false? And then number 4 is 1 in 2 women and 1 in 3 men were between the ages of 18 and 24 when they first experienced IPV. Remember, these are US statistics. And then finally, bisexual people are twice as likely to experience IPV as gay or lesbian people. I think I just missed out the IPV. So bisexual people are twice as likely to experience IPV as gay or lesbian people. So lots of people are responding as we speak. I reckon there's probably, oh yeah, no, we're still quite active on the polls. We are. There's a lot of people we've got here, Charlene. It's fantastic. Great. So I'm going to close the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'll share the results with you. So most of us thought, hey, look, I think that's true. I think more than 1 in 3 women and more than 1 in 4 men have experienced intimate partner violence, and you would be correct. Really sobering statistics, and starting off really general, and then we get a little bit more specific. So the incidence of IPV for gay men is higher than for lesbian women. We were a little bit more divided there. That actually is false. The incidence for IPV lesbian women is higher than for gay men, which I personally found just a little bit surprising. 1 in 4 multi-race non-Hispanic women have experienced IPV in their lifetime. The statistics might be a bit jarring for you in that it's actually 1 in 2. It's actually just over half. It's about 53% of multiracial non-Hispanic women that have experienced IPV in their lifetime. 1 in 2 women and 1 in 3 men were between the ages of 18 and 24 when they first experienced IPV. And that one, I'm going to just check so that I make sure is true. And this is sort of our age group that we're really looking to educate before they fall into this age group. This is our target audience. It doesn't matter if you've got a 15-year-old, it doesn't matter. We're really wanting to target those younger people with information so that by the time they do go into that most risky group, we have armed them for being involved in intimate relationships. So that's why I think that statistic is important for us, because that's the work that we're doing tonight. 5, bisexual people are twice as likely to experience IPV as gay and lesbian people. Now, that is just unbelievably, but it is true. So for some reason, and I'm sure there are really good reasons for this, but bisexual people are the most at risk out of everybody, racially, from racial groups, from sexual orientation groups, and from gender groups. Bisexual people really are at risk. So I hope you found those statistics interesting, but I do know that some of us really struggle with that sort of information, but I just wanted to place us there to begin with so that we can see the importance, because as I was working through those statistics come from One Love, which is an organisation to prevent sexual violence. One Love, it's called. I just wanted us to be aware that, you know, our role as adults is really powerful, and we need to try and help our adolescents through a pretty difficult time as they navigate personal relationships, and particularly intimate relationships. So let me tell you a little bit about our adolescents. Not that you probably, you know, don't know already if you're a parent or a guardian or a trusted adult, but their hormones are going nuts. And testosterone and oxytocin are 2 hormones that are bonding hormones. I know testosterone, we always talk about it as arousal and things like that, which is true, but it's a social hormone. And these are at the peak during adolescence. And so chemically, their bodies are wired for connection. And good connections actually do help decrease cortisol, which is a stress hormone. And so they can be really, really helpful when relationships are healthy. And young people really yearn for those connected romantic relationships because of the way they're chemically wired. They're also neurologically wired for connection, but it's a little bit harder because their limbic system, which is the emotional part of the brain, is pretty much complete. But that executive functioning part of the brain and the judgment part of the brain is not. And so they're motivated to have connection and to experience novelty and excitement and sensation seeking by their limbic system, and their judgment part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, is like lagging behind and not speaking up. So you can see how that could place people at a bit of a risk when it comes to relationships. And of course, the body is pretty much by late teens fully sexually and physically developed. So sexual desire and arousal and all of those things are gearing them up for coupling, as well as those social factors as looking at media and relationships being sort of put up on a pedestal. So we put all of those things together, and there's a lot more that actually orient them towards wanting relationships. But even those three things, and then they idealize romance. Romance for a sensation and novelty seeking person ticks all the boxes. The biology and that attraction, romance, ticking those boxes. The expectation that they might be able to fulfill some part of that sexual desire and have that sort of sexual expression, man, that's a big box that gets ticked off then. Social status rises if someone is in a relationship. Neurological benefits, that well-being feeling of somebody loves me, is incredibly intoxicating. And media models for us that everybody should be in one, even though intellectually we know that's not true. So we have a lot of factors that really compress into this idealization of romance, but not a lot of skill and not a lot of experience to help our young people navigate romance. So again, there's that sort of conflict between the two. So what we're going to talk about tonight is, given that situation, we've got chemistry, biology, neurology, sociology, we've got all of this sort of really pushing people towards coupling and towards intimacy and no experience. We really want to help our young people to prevent bad things happening, because we know that the chances are relatively high that if we don't say anything, we're leaving them out to sort of go into that world and navigate it by themselves, and it probably won't end well. So we've got 5 protective factors. There are definitely others, but these are sort of up there with the most helpful for our time slot. So we're going to talk about avoiding alcohol and drugs, knowing our personal values and boundaries, how anticipation of events and things like that is just so important. I like to say anticipate to vaccinate, because it's just so important that they already have sort of like a far-reaching point of view. Safer dating and knowledge of the law. Those 5 things are really, really important for our young people to safely navigate intimate relationships. So firstly, alcohol and drugs, that's number 1. It's the biggest risk factor. For people who are sexually assaulted, alcohol and drugs generally play a fairly prominent role. The problem with this is that we educate, Health Connected, the organisation I work for, we educate in schools. And we know this to be true, that alcohol and marijuana play a very important, and I hate to say it, widely accepted role in teenage sexuality, despite all the education. So we are trying like mad to talk about consent and to talk about the fact that consent, when mixed with alcohol, is no longer actually legal consent at all. It makes it null and void. We talk about all this stuff, and it's so hard to break through into young people's brains that alcohol and drugs and sex is just a really bad idea. It's just a really bad idea. We know that teens do use drugs to decrease inhibition and decrease anxiety. We know that they use it as a convenient excuse of like, oh, but I was drunk, I was high, it wasn't my fault. And we know that they use them to increase risk and that excitement. We know that they like being on the edge, but it's just so dangerous. We know that alcohol impairs cognitive function. They can't think straight, even though they think they can, and that's the same for adults. Responsible decisions and behaviours are far less likely because cognitive functioning is impaired. I've talked about consent just being decimated by alcohol, and it provides predators with easy prey. Bottom line, if you can say this to your teen, if you want to be easy prey for a dangerous person, get drunk at that party. You know, you can say things like that so that it really becomes real to them. Remember the purple text? These are our actionable items. These are the things that we can help our teens come to really realize about alcohol, drugs, and sex, and that they don't mix. You can use language like, yeah, it's not smart. Teens want to be smart. They want to be street smart. They want to be sort of perceived by their peers as smart, not necessarily academically clever, but just sort of, you know, a little bit street smart, and that's just not smart. You can use embarrassment as a demotivator. One of the most motivating things for adolescents is to avoid embarrassment and shame. That it's highly motivating to avoid embarrassment or shame, but alcohol actually often causes us to do embarrassing and shameful things. So use that embarrassment sort of aversion as a demotivator. The desire for success and status and admiration, use that as a motivator to make better decisions. You know, I know you're smart. I know you're smart. So don't mix alcohol and sex. It's just a recipe for disaster. And then you can have a story for young people to use if they're pressured by a partner or a good friend and they find it really hard to wiggle out of that pressure. Somebody wants them to drink. They clearly want them to maybe even get drunk. Give them a bit of a story to use. It doesn't matter if it's not true because we're talking about safety, right? We're talking about getting them out of a situation. And so provide them with a little story. They can say, yeah, last time I was drunk, I vomited all over my friend's shoulder. It was so disgusting. I don't want that to happen again. Or last time that happened, I vomited in my friend's car and they still haven't got the smell out. Like, it doesn't really matter what the story is. We just need to give them some tools to sort of wiggle out of that. Any questions, pop them in the Q&A. I know we're covering some topics here, but that one, that alcohol and drugs mixing with sex, is something that's personally hit me over the last couple of weeks. I feel really passionate about it because it's just so dangerous. So try and really let your young people know it's a non-negotiable. It just shouldn't ever happen if they want to be protective of their own self and they want to protect themselves from sexual assault or being accused of sexual assault. Okay, number 2 protective factor, and this is really important, is we need to be very clear with our young people about their values and ours, particularly in regards to sex, because we're not only talking about physical violence, we're talking about sexual violence. And quite frankly, most of us parents and guardians really do want to keep our young people sort of safe from premature sexual experience that wasn't wanted, you know. And so these are really important values and boundaries to instill in young people and really talk about openly. So this is what most parents agree with. Now, some parents might not, so I get that, it's no pressure. But most parents do agree that sex should be meaningful. It should be within a caring relationship. It should be freely chosen. It should be responsible, and it should be private. And those core values will motivate boundaries and behavior. So I think as parents and guardians, we need to admit that sex is pleasurable. There's no point in denying it. Media tells them how pleasurable it is. It is also incredibly powerful, and it's very intimate. And for it to be enriching for both people, it needs to mean the same thing for both people. Otherwise, it can be pretty damaging. And sex is a bonding behavior. Those hormones I talked about and others are actually sort of secreted during and after sex. And it's meant to be profoundly bonding. And the boundary that having that meaningful value in place means that young people are far less likely to engage in casual sex or hookups. They really want to reserve sex for a meaningful or a committed or a married relationship. And so values are just intrinsically connected to boundaries and behavior. Within a caring relationship, so I'm just picking apart those values because of the vulnerabilities of sex. So let's just think about how vulnerable you are in terms of consent when a person is naked. Hello. The potential outcomes, let's think pregnancy, STIs, sexually transmitted infections, of sex. The relationship context or the relational context really does require people to care for and respect each other. And the boundary is the same or similar. If somebody does have that expectation, that is a high value for them, they're not going to have casual sex or hookups. Sex should be freely given. So sex is given intentionally, deliberately. It shouldn't just happen to a person. You know, I can't tell you how many times I've heard that it just happened. Sex should be very intentional. It should never be by accident. It should never be taken by anyone. It's given like a really carefully chosen, precious gift. And it's joyfully given, it's playfully and pleasurably given. We don't want to tell our kids that sex is bad because they know it's not. So you can talk about it in a realistic type of way because it is meant to be fun. It is meant to be enjoyed, but it needs to be safe. And so the boundary there is that pressure and coercion is just not tolerated. Any time somebody begins to pressure for intimacy, your young person will see that as a red flag. It needs to be responsible because there's so much to know for sex to be safe and healthy. And so when somebody realizes all the things that they need to know and do to be responsible and safe, the boundary then is that they will use birth control. In fact, sex is not even, it's not even on the cards if there's no birth control used or a barrier method like a condom to help prevent STIs. And of course, communication around all of those responsibilities must be in place because we share these responsibilities. It's not just me, it's not just you, it's both of us together. And finally, the last value, but there's many, 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 many others, is that sex needs to be private, because if we can establish it as that privacy is important, it's just between us two, then that will help prevent things like rumors and bragging at school, which is just so nasty and distasteful for something that's meant to be so meaningful. So you can share language with your young person because we know they're going to be pressured to share. Oh, what happened? What happened? You know, that sort of thing. You can share language like, yeah, I'm not a jerk. I don't talk about that stuff. Or, oh, we have a privacy pact. There's no way I'm going to share that outside of us. Or, you know, you can work out the language with your young people because sometimes our language and their language is different. They think we're a little bit I don't know, old-fashioned, I suppose. So sort it out with them, role play it, practice it, rehearse it, so they're ready for an onslaught. They're ready for pressure. Now, the boundary associated with that is that because they value privacy so highly, that intimacy happens in a private place. Now, I know that sounds strange, but, you know, cars and sex are used all the time together. And so they would be more private about choosing a place. Beaches and sex happen all the time, but hopefully they will be more intentional about choosing a place that's private. And of course, non-consensual sharing of information and images. It's just not tolerated. It's not tolerated, and it's not something that would be done. You know, it's just off the table. So purple text, what we can do. We need to tell them, our young people, our teens, healthy boundaries repel fruitcakes. You can replace the word fruitcake with anything you want. But healthy boundaries repel fruitcakes. Just got a bit of a scratchy throat. Let me have a cough. So we need to use all of these values and others, like faith and culture, to really fortify our teens' boundaries. We need to give them that sense of moral responsibility, and that will differ from family to family, from person to person. We need them to have such positive expectations of healthy relationships that they just don't really accept anything else. You know, it's just not okay. If there are red flags in any of those values, it's like, yeah, that could be a deal breaker. And we want them to really think critically about those values, apply them to their relationships, and do that early, because it's much easier to dissolve a relationship and sort of disentangle oneself from a relationship early on. So the other thing you can do, I don't know whether you like watching movies and TV with your kids. We do in our family, and we can ask our teens to identify values. So sometimes you'll see this beautiful scene of a relationship, and it's just heartwarming and it's super helpful and super healthy. Call those things out. Say, oh, did you see that? They clearly value connection. They clearly value meaning. And you just name those things and ask your teen to identify the lack of these. And you can ask it in a question. So there was a scene with sexual violence. You can say, oh gosh, tell me what's missing here, and get them to feed back some of those values to you. So we don't want to tell them everything because they're clever and they know, so get them to tell us as well. All right. So a hands up activity. I hope we've got the capacity for this. I think we do. All right, I'm interested what you think. So from a teen's perspective, this is my question to you. What involves more risk? Hands up for. Find that on the panel, either at the bottom or the top of your screen. Great, we've got one person saying, yeah, I found mine. Hands up if you think drinking alcohol from a teen's perspective involves more risk than the other four choices. Hands up for that. Lots of people raising hands. Great. We're up to, around 7 of us, 8. Lots of raising hands. Fantastic. Okay. Who thinks teens, from a teen's perspective, marijuana amongst that list is the most sort of risky? Yeah, a few of us. Let's see how many. 6 of us. Okay. Who thinks, from a teen's perspective, unprotected sex would be the most risky activity? Right. I'm seeing the hands up. I hope you can see all the hands going up as well. Okay, we're at about 11. What about driving with peers? What's the most risky there? Do you think driving with peers, they might think is the most risky activity? Great. This time about 7. And finally, being ostracized from a social group. What do you reckon? I love this. This is great. Look at all these hands, all these thumbs. Yes. Okay, about 35 of us. I love the fact. Right. We need to know this for our own parenting and for when we present information. The most shameful, embarrassing, negative, uncomfortable thing is being ostracized from a social group. That's the biggest risk for teens, which means they will do pretty much anything to avoid that, pretty much. So what we find with teenagers is to avoid those that immediate danger of being cast out or shamed or embarrassed or going down sort of the social hierarchy, ridicule, all that stuff. To avoid that, they will definitely go ahead and do risky stuff because they just don't want to be in that position of needing to experience shame. And that's where that brain and chemical sort of conflict come into play. And this is why the anticipation perspective, that protective factor, is really important, because due to those neurological limitations that we talked about before, and the fact that their executive functioning is pretty slow, but their emotional sensation seeking, impulse control or lack of brain sort of is really on hyperactive, good decision making takes a lot of time and it's really effortful. So for a lot of teens, it's just easier to just not even try and make those decisions, but to just let things happen, And we need them to know that we know this is true of them. And so helping young people to think and speak clearly about those values that we just talked about actually provides them with less moral ambivalence when they're in a really high pressure situation, because they've already done the thought processing. They already know what's okay with them. They've already talked with their trusted adult. They have a library of practice. They have a library of rehearsed words and language. They have role played potentially with their adult. They already are set up for success prior to that really pressurized party situation. So we need to help teens, remember this is the purple bit, help teens anticipate situations that strong emotions are going to be present, which will make them really prone to choose to save face over safety. So we know that anytime someone is in a car with another teen, it doubles their chance of having an accident. And then you add a third person, and it doubles the chance of those two, that chance. It doesn't just sort of add, 0.3% to it or 30% extra. No, it doubles it again. And the next person, it doubles again. And so it's exponential, and we know that. So we know cars are unsafe for young people. So we tell them all this stuff, and we don't want to tell them too much because it overwhelms them. But we want to make them aware. So practice role playing, driving a car, you're driving down the road, you're actually doing it. Imagine your buddy wants you to do something silly, speed, take a corner really quick, go over a speed hump fast, weave in and out of traffic. What would you say? And practice. Practice tone of voice, practice refusal, practice looking into their eyes, body language, all that really clear, strong communication needs to be practiced aloud so you can critique it. Show your young person what you mean. Involve yourself with it. Help them to imagine into the future and work backwards. It's a really hard task. You can work forwards if you like first and then work backwards, because it's a cognitive task that young people can't really do until about 16. Same with planning of time. We plan time the best when we work backwards. But for some kids, it takes them a long time to be able to do that. It's really a very tricky cognitive task, so they will need our help with that. Start at the point of the accident on the freeway, and then you can work back and say, yeah, you know, each time somebody asks you to do something, or the party, you can start at the party, alone in a room, work back to prevent that from happening. And share your own wisdom about parties and alcohol and how, you know, that anticipating thing of, if you go into a private room or a dorm at a party with another person, they will think you're wanting to have sex. So allow them to anticipate that. So as they walk up the stairs holding someone's hand and that door is opened, they're not naive. They've been told by you that most probably it is going to lead to sex. And so they know this already. So they're not going to walk up the stairs in the first place because they know. So instead they suggest something else. Oh no, let's just keep dancing. This is way more fun. Always get your own drinks because we don't want them drugged. Going to parties in a group and watching out for each other is way safer than going alone. And oral sex is as commonly anticipated as kissing often at a party. Young people need to know that so that they know that they don't go into those private spaces or even into a garden, because often that's what's expected. So, safer dating. Remember, I didn't say safe dating, folks. Safer dating. It's like safe sex. That's not a thing. Safer sex is a thing. Safer dating is a thing. Now, the thing is about technology, of course, is that there's just constant connection all the time. My son's girlfriend lives in Arizona, and sometimes they're on FaceTime, and they're literally on FaceTime for hours, and we've had to put boundaries in place so that they don't spend forever unlimitless time on FaceTime, because she's ahead of him, right? And she needs her sleep. So we also need to know that those online relationships, while they can be safer physically, because they can't have sex while online, although that's debatable, but they can be more vulnerable and dependent and psychologically vulnerable. So just because it's an online one, folks, it doesn't mean that it's not intimate. It doesn't mean that it's not vulnerable. It doesn't mean that it can't be abusive. It absolutely can, because the definition now of dating has changed as well. Online dating, the expectation often is naked videos, naked pictures, live naked sex, essentially. And so it doesn't mean that it's safe, although physically it might be safer. So what can we do as adults? Well, we need, particularly when a relationship is young, we need to insist on group dates, especially when it's not blossomed out of a friendship. You know, we need to, and a young person, it's a young person we're talking about, not an 18-year-old, but someone who's 15 or 16, just while they're getting to know a person, and it's in a safe environment like a movie or a restaurant. It's public. It can't be in a secluded area. We need to make sure they feel our presence, like we're sort of, that person sitting on their shoulder, whispering in their ears, because we do know, research says that if a young person feels the presence of their adult, their little voice, then restraint is far more likely to be used. So we can use mantras. The one I like and the one I use all the time is make good choices. Make good choices, you know. And so hopefully when something is in conflict with that, they remember that little voice. Not fail safe, but it's the hope. Encourage your teen to have offline time without their partner. Really encourage that. Talk about that solidification of self. You're your own person, that sense of agency, autonomy, independence. You know, who are you without this person? How much do you want to give away? You're sort of blending into each other. You won't be able to extricate yourself from that relationship if you need to, because you have lost your sense of self. Find it again. Be autonomous, be powerful, be independent. Sometimes they just feel trapped on FaceTime, by the way. So you might need to say, get them to blame you. Oh, mum said she's going to pull the computer out of the wall, or I don't know what you do, turn off the Wi-Fi or something. Get them to blame you if they really can't disconnect, because sometimes they feel a bit trapped, like, oh, it'll hurt their feelings. Just a little word on sexting, because we know that online relationships are still intimate. And we want to talk about sexual agency with our young people, that sense of they are in control of their own sexuality. It belongs to them. And the thing is, when they send naked pictures, they actually lose that capacity to be agents of their own sexuality. They actually pass that over to somebody else, or it might even be interpreted as sexual harassment. We need teens to be fiercely protective of that agency, and we want them to become really aware of not only that vulnerability that we've been talking about quite a bit, but also their power to take that back, you know, with great sort of sense of pride, to take that autonomy back. And we need to also remind them that some relationships, most relationships aren't forever, and being hurt can really motivate revenge, and revenge using of non-consensual images is very, very common. We do not want to give hurt people power. So that needs to be discussed as well. So finally, we come to the law, and we need to talk about consent a lot, which at its real basis is really just agreeing and permission. But there's a lot that's wrapped up in consent. We use this little acronym for accept. We talk about consent being active. That's that affirmative yes in California, that it's a choice, it's continual, it's based on equal power, it is precise and specific, and that it's transparent. Now, based on equal power, I'm just going to pick that one out just for now. That's where that alcohol comes in. If somebody doesn't have cognitive functioning because they're drunk, any amount of alcohol actually makes consent null and void. Our kids need to know that. I'm picking that out because I just know how acceptable it is to have drunk sex or high sex. It's just not okay. So we need to know the law. We need to know what consent is. We need to teach it to our kids, and we need to talk about particularly these 5 protective factors. We need to teach the power of pausing. In fact, our goal really is to slow our kids down and to make them more thoughtful. We really need to slow them down, to pause and check in with themselves, to pause and check in with a partner. Another thing we need to make them aware of is that a person's body doesn't indicate consent. So an erection, for example, doesn't mean consent. That's, those physiological reactions that just happen, biologically, physically, physiologically, but psychologically someone might not be consenting. And so if there's any sign of, just not being enthusiastic, being quiet, being a bit reserved. We can't look at a person's body and then say, oh, well, they must be into it. It's not okay. That is not consent. It is not specific enough. I like to view consent like a road trip because our families loves road trips. And I got this from a book that I read a long time ago, and it just spoke to me because we do like road trips, and I think consent can be likened to it. So when you go on a road trip, the driver is in control of the car, and before getting into the car, of course, you've discussed, well, hopefully you've discussed your destination on this road trip, because it's a shared thing, this road trip. Once the car is being driven by someone else, if you don't discuss the journey or the destination, you could really end up somewhere you don't want to be. So the destination is discussed before the road trip is embarked on, before you leave. Now, you can change your mind on the way. You can choose to go somewhere different. You can choose to stop and have a picnic. You can choose to go to different waterfalls. And that's all fine as long as we're all in agreement. And if we're not, then you might need to get out, but you need to know that the driver is safe. You need to know that the driver well enough so that they actually will let you out of the car somewhere safe if you don't want to go to the destination after all. And consent really is like a journey in an intimate relationship. And it's not only over the course of the relationship, it's each little time those interactions happen, because it's ongoing and it's specific and it can be refused at any time. So I've just popped a couple of things in about the law and image-based sex crimes, because, you know, things like sexual assault and rape and sexual harassment are quite well known, but there are image-based sex crimes that are that do pertain to California. And so it's important that we know them, we teach our kids to be careful about them as well. You can access this video too if you want to go back, because I know I'm flying through, because it's a massive topic in a fairly short time. So romance, it goes wrong sometimes. And I think the most important thing we can talk with our kids about early on in a relationship is to not be afraid of conflict. Don't be afraid of it. In fact, use it to your advantage. If it happens, notice how your partner responds in that conflict situation. If they don't do well, if they fly off the handle, if they're aggressive, certainly if they're physically aggressive, deal breaker. And the earlier we find this stuff out, the better, because it's much easier to disentangle oneself from a relationship the earlier we're in the relationship, or for the least amount of time. Sometimes teens think, oh yes, but I can fix them. You know, if only we, you know, I can really work hard. We can improve our communication. It's actually not their job. And we know that if they think they can fix it, then something like that cycle of violence is more likely to happen, because they're going to be sucked in by those apologies and those gifts, you know, and it just goes round and round and round again, and they can't get out of it. And so we want them to be able to intervene early, notice red flags early, and get out early. So you might be wondering, well, what do I sort of look for in terms of a relationship going south or going wrong? Obviously, there's signs of physical abuse. Usually it's bruising or redness around sort of wrists. Choking is really common. We know that if someone uses choking in sex, they're far more likely to die from sexual assault. Like, it's that simple. I think it's 70% more likely, or I can't remember. One Love has a statistic on that too. Signs of depression, anxiety or worry, changes in self-care, not being interested in sport or their hobbies like they used to, their grades sort of fall, self-harm, and that can be actually quite difficult to notice, particularly in winter, and increases of sort of risky behavior, because a lot of people self-soothe by risk. Like, it makes them feel alive. It makes them feel like, or makes them feel something. Same with self-harm. And it's a very strange relationship that we have with risk and harm. But for many people, it is like a medicine. And so we have to be careful. What can we do? We can listen without judgment. Anytime we're talking with teens, it can't be with judgment. Otherwise, they'll go somewhere else or nowhere. And we won't know about it. We always need to believe them, always. If they feel judged or unbelieved or not believed, they'll go somewhere else and they won't come back. We need to remind them that it's never their fault. We don't criticize them. We help them identify abuse. We need to encourage them to seek professional help, because sometimes we're too close to the situation. And we have to help them do a safety plan. I'm just going to check my timing. So this safety plan, this is going to be my last thing before Q&A, but this safety plan is just a fantastic idea for teens who are starting to get a little bit more independent. You might want to go back to it on the video. We're needing to just set up an exit plan. And so you just choose a word that you and your teen have agreed upon. And it's got to be really short, and it needs to be really unemotional, like dog. And then if your teen ever finds themselves in a really risky situation, they can text dog to you or to another trusted adult who's on call, and they will go to the scene. That's why those location settings on the phone are really important. They might knock on the window of the car and they say, "Quick, we need to go. There's a family emergency." So there's no sort of judgment. The unsafe person doesn't know what's going on. It's a family emergency. Quick, we need to come. So you get your child, your teen out, away from the dangerous person. Now, the teen doesn't get to change their mind, because this has all been put in place for emergencies, right? They don't get to say, "Oh, actually, false alarm." No, they must agree to come regardless. And there's no negotiation, certainly not in front of that unsafe person. And that trusted adult doesn't have to be you. It can be somebody else. And that just will allow you that sense of, okay, I've got this exit plan in place. I feel a little bit better that we have a plan in place before my young person sort of launches out into the world of dating, and I feel really unsafe about that. These are just some more, there were a couple of resources there. I'm going to leave this on while I answer some questions. So just going to Q&A. Charlene, did you want to read these, or are you happy for me to go ahead? You can read them. I love having another voice.
Thank you, Vanessa. That was a lot. And thank you, everybody. You've all stayed online with us, and we really are glad to have had you. Vanessa does this incredibly well. A few great questions, Vanessa. Let's go for it. Here is a good one. What would you say if a female teen wants to win someone over by offering sex, partly out of peer pressure?
Yeah, so I would talk about sex as a bargaining tool with that young person. And that's why those sexual values are so important, because how we view our own sexuality, so not just the act of sex, but our own sexuality, is how our potential partners or our peers will view us, right? So if we're really free with sex, if we do offer it as a bargaining tool, that is going to be reflected to our peers and to our partners, and they're going to devalue us and eventually objectify us. We're just going to become a means to an end, right, of sexual satisfaction or whatever. So I would really urge young people to be very careful about the way they project their own sexual image, and it's grounded in those values that we talked about. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Good advice. So Vanessa, so often parents don't take teenage relationships seriously. They say, oh, it's just puppy love. We know now because of the brain research that in fact teens feel things even more strongly than at any other time in their life. What do you say to a parent who is tempted to devalue a teenage relationship?
Yeah, I'd say that's very unwise, actually, because we know that our teenagers, when we're engaging with them, they need to feel it's imperative that we take them seriously. So if that relationship is serious to them, if they articulate that they're in love, then we absolutely must believe them and take them seriously. That will then facilitate further engagement and honesty and openness. If we don't take them seriously, they'll shut off from us. They won't bother. You need to show them that you take them seriously in order for them to open up to us. It's a privilege to have a young person come to us and talk to us about their relationships, and we need to honor that by taking them seriously. It's very unwise to laugh off or minimize a relationship of a teenager.
Okay, I know from experience that that's really true, Vanessa. And I love how you've emphasized agency and how important that is to teenagers. Somebody's asking for the last slide back, but I'm not sure if it's this one. Did you have resources on the slide before?
No, I didn't.
Okay.
I can't go back. No, this is my only resource, but I do have it, I think, in the chat. I think Bev's going to put that link in the chat for our whole list.
Okay, and we are going to give you folks this resource, okay?
Oh, I know what the person was talking about. I had a video from One Love, but there's lots of videos from One Love. You can look them up online, and they're also on our resource lists that Bev has. And there was just an activity to do with your kid to talk about, or with your teen to talk about isolating feelings. Because sometimes it's hard for young people to know and articulate feelings and identify them.
Okay, and we know parents and caregivers, we know these are tough topics, but the more comfortable you can get, like Vanessa is doing tonight, just talking with your kids, the better. So one final question, if you don't mind, Vanessa.
No,
this is, I'm sure, one that many people have experienced. Parent asks, what are your recommendations for a 15-year-old involved in an online relationship? They heard some inappropriate voice messages. Should they shut down the dating completely? What should they do?
Yeah, so this is why that values piece is so important, because if we decide, and it depends on the age of the young person, right? But if we decide to just shut it down completely, they go behind your back. They just do. And they'll say they won't, but they probably will. And so we need to know that off the bat. And even if we think, oh no, my child won't, they probably will. So we need to know that off the bat, and we need to then, instead of talk about all the don'ts, we really push the do's. So we talk about how much better intimacy is when we use positive language, when we don't use derogatory language. How much better, if they're having sex, how much better sex can be when we appreciate the person for who they are as opposed to what they can give us. And then those inappropriate messages usually stem from a devaluing either of sex or devaluing of the person. And so when we lift up and use positive language and really sort of propel our teen into a positive direction and why it's so great, they'll be more likely to catch that rather than the negative messaging.
All right. Well, Vanessa, I want to be careful with your time and everybody's time that's online. We probably should call it here, because we again want to respect everyone's time. You have stayed with us wonderfully. I will record these questions and just pass them on to Vanessa. If there's anything else, I will let you know. But again, thank you everyone for being with us tonight. Special huge thanks to Vanessa Kellam from Health Connected for everything. This video will be available, parents. You can watch it, you can review it, and we will be sending a link to a resource guide that Vanessa has prepared through Health Connected. So thank you, everybody. Stay safe, stay well, keep your kids safe, And we hope to see you again soon. Good night, everybody.
Thank you so much, everyone. Bye.